Hey everybody, this is Mickey with Free Roaming Photography, and I am doing something a little different. I am inside today. It is a wet, snowy day. It's almost raining. So I thought, since it's the new year, this would be a perfect opportunity to go through my favorite images of 2025. And totally coincidentally, there happen to be 25 of them. So I'm not going to dwell on a whole lot of them. So we're going to try and rush through what I like, what I maybe didn't like, and just why they wound up in my top 25. So let's get going. Okay, so this one right here, it's always a good day when you find otters. And getting a good shot of them can be tricky because, like I always like to preach, you want to be eye level. And especially if you're looking down into water, which is almost always the case, you're not going to get the kind of depth in a shot that I really like. So I was able to get down low for this one. You can see there's like some bokeh and blur effect in the foreground as well as the background, and it really helps this otter just pop out on the ice. And it's a great portrait, I think. I mean, I'm really happy with the way it came out. It's got a it's got a cute little expression on their face as they're trying to look around and get a sense of their bearings. There's a nice contrast between the wet fur on the back and then the drier snow on the front, around the face. And really just a beautiful winter scene. I really was happy with the way this one came out. And also, what I like to do with any wildlife is I like to give them breathing room, especially if they're looking across a frame. I want them to be able to have room to look across the frame. So if I had had that otter right up against the left side of the frame, it would have looked a little weird. It would have looked a little off, um, because your eye wants to follow where that otter is looking. And in this case, it's across the left side of the frame. That works out really well, and it kind of lends itself to a more interesting composition, placing the otter on the right side and giving them that room to look across the left side. Also from this winter, I had another little rare encounter, and this was with an ermine. It had its white coat on, and you can see that beautiful little black tip on the tail. And in this case, it was climbing along some rocks and cliffs on Miller Butte in the National Elk Refuge. And that otter previously was also at the Flat Creek Overlook on the National Elk Refuge. So both of these two coming from the National Elk Refuge. And this ermine was blazing fast. I was having a hard time getting any shots of him because he was running around so much. What I really like about this is just the softness of the ermine. Even though it's black and white, there's definitely a softness to it, not in a blurry kind of way, out of focus. But in this case, just the fur looks really soft. It looks really fluffy, contrasted with the hard rocky cliffs that it was scurrying around. So I really like that contrast, just this little pop of softness in this otherwise really rocky landscape. And again, I also tried to give it some breathing room in where it was looking. So in this case, it was looking more up and to the right. So I tried to account for that. Yeah, just a nice little ermine portrait that I was happy with. Now, technically speaking, I am not crazy about the exposure on this shot, but any shot of a mountain lion is going to be exciting. Now, technically speaking, I am not super excited with the exposure on this shot. I was looking into the sun. It was very backlit and harsh. But at the same time, it's a mountain lion. And mountain lion shots, even though they are definitely here, they are still very rare to come by. So I was really happy just with the opportunity to photograph a mountain lion. So in this case, like I said, the lighting's not great. It's not lit up well. It was in the shade. I had to do a lot of post-processing work just to get it a little bit more balanced. So in terms of exposure and technical aspects, it's not a great shot in my opinion, but I don't want to negate the fact that it is a shot of a mountain lion, which are not easy to come by, particularly in Western North America. This mountain lion was on a carcass up in northern part of Grand Teton National Park. And so I was able to scout out for a little while with a couple of clients, and we waited for that mountain lion to come out. And it only came out once or twice, and this was probably the best look we had at it. Now, in terms of a subject like this, a lot of people are tempted to put it right at the center of the frame. And that is always a mistake. You never want your subject right in the middle of the frame. And that is because instinctively, when we look at a photo or a painting or anything, our eye naturally wants to go right to the middle. So when you put it off center, it forces your eye to kind of move around the frame a little bit more. And in this case, I put it at the bottom because our eye is going to start defaulting to how it reads a page in a book, left to right, top to bottom. So when you put your most interesting subject kind of off center and more toward the bottom and kind of give it more of an environment, it becomes more like something you can read. And in this case, I didn't put it at the bottom right because it was moving to the right, and I wanted to give it, again, space to move across the frame. So definitely one of the more underrated species here is a bird known as the greater sage grouse. And this is a very threatened bird. Its habitat is vanishing at a very rapid rate, and it is a keystone species feeding a lot of animals in this whole region, all around Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, all over the place, all over the northern Rocky Mountain areas, kind of spreading out from the mountains and into more of the plains and deserts. That being said, there's a fairly healthy population here in Grand Teton National Park, and this one I happened to catch while I was driving into town one morning. It was during a little bit of a snowstorm, and I just saw this head popping up right over the sagebrush, trying to get a little bit of shelter from the snowstorm and just sort of checking to see how the weather was looking. And same thing as the previous one, I kind of placed this one at the bottom right. It happened to be looking left, so this worked out in this situation where I could have it down at the bottom right. So the eye is going to read that whole picture before it gets to that sage grouse. And typically in snowy scenes like this, you're going to find you need to overexpose your photo. Your built-in light meter is going to tell your camera that the scene needs to be a lot darker than it actually should be. So when you're aiming into fog or snow or anything that's bright white, you are going to need to overexpose to get an accurate photo. Otherwise, it's going to come out looking very dim. Now, what I've noticed every March is that the gray crown Rosy finches flood my feeders, and I do not want to stop them. I love those birds. They are very beautiful birds, and they come in massive flocks, and for a lot of people, they're a very hard bird to find. So if they're just going to chill at my feeders, dozens and dozens of them, I am okay with that. And I will take that opportunity to get some photos of them, especially in the snow. Like this one, I deliberately made this a high-key photo edit, meaning that I pushed those highlights really high so that it would look like it's basically on a white background. The only thing that kind of distinguishes that it's snow is right around its little feet. You can see the legs dipping into the snow. And I happen to really like that. I think this is a perfect example of high key editing where you want to push those highlights up. Obviously preserve the shadows and the darks just to kind of give it some contrast and really make those colors pop. But at the same time, I think this one lent itself really well to high key editing because there was just so much snow behind it as well. There wasn't a whole lot of detail in the snow behind it or in front of it. So it worked out in that aspect. And I know I just said a little bit ago, do not center your subject, but when you're this close to an animal or any kind of subject and it's filling most of the frame, what you're centering is not so much the animal, but the focal point. And when you're that close to an animal, the focal point is going to wind up being the eye. The eye is the first place we're going to look to try to connect to an animal or a person if you have to be shooting people. And so by putting the eye off to the right side, I fit the whole body in, but then also by placing it off center, I kind of give you room to move around the photo and explore the bird and its details, because in the very center of the photo is just an arbitrary part of its wing. And so in this case, you're going to gravitate to its eye and start moving around from there. So same thing, I don't want it right on the edge. I want to give it a little bit of breathing room in either case, both the tail and the face. Yeah, when you're that close to a subject, when you're able to shoot that close, you can focus more on where to put the eye and make sure the eye is not in the center versus the subject itself. So as the bird migration started to heat up, I definitely made my way around the area and found all sorts of fun stuff, including this Wilson's phalarope. They had eluded me for many weeks, and finally I was able to catch some, not only sightings of them, but some good shots, and I was really happy with this one. This is one of several I got that I really liked, but I think this one might be my favorite. And I was able to get down low so you can see it's not like the water's not right behind it, and that produces a really nice reflection. And it was a nice foggy day as well. Fog always lends a nice sort of mood and atmosphere to the subject and the environment. And so with this one, again, it was swimming to the right, so I gave it some room to breathe. I kind of placed it a little bit more up to the top left. The rule of thirds, if you're following that, that's that top left intersection. And the rule of thirds is not necessarily a rule you have to stick to, but when nothing else is working, it's a great rule to fall back on. And that's why it's there, is because it will give you some structure when you're not finding any. Another bird I was happy to find that often gets overlooked is the white-crowned sparrow. And this one was just eating dandelion seeds in the middle of a trail. And so to get this look, I was not standing, I was not even sitting. I was lying down on my belly in the trail, and my camera was essentially lying on the ground. And that is how I was able to put so much depth behind it. And that just goes back to that rule that I love to preach, is always get eye level. Yes, getting closer helps. If I'd been sitting, it would have been a nice shot. But you can see the difference when you're lying down and getting to the eye level on the ground. It makes a huge difference, and it really helps that bird pop out from the background and give more focus to the actual dandelions that it was nibbling from. And then in terms of placement, you can see it's looking up to the left and trying to get a fix on something it heard. And so in that case, I gave it room to breathe. So there's enough detail going on around it. I'm not cutting off the dandelions, so you can kind of get a sense of what it was doing. And then there's a little story going on there. Maybe it heard something, maybe it was alarmed by something. And so it took a break and started looking around to see what was going on. But if you have a subject that's really low to the ground, do not be afraid to lie down on the ground and get something of it. It will make a world of difference. Now, great blue herons are very common, but they are also very photogenic. This one especially was just perched at the top of a dead tree in front of a forest, and it just worked out beautifully. He was just sitting there, and what really works about this one is the great blue heron itself, as well as the dead tree, are very bright compared to the background. The background obviously is a dark forested green. It's going to help that bird and the tree trunk and essentially the foreground pop out from the background much more, just because of how bright they are compared to the trees behind them. And this is another thing. A lot of these shots, in fact, I believe all the shots we've looked at so far, except for the mountain lion, were on a cloudy day. These are all overcast skies, or at least with clouds or diffused sunlight in some way. That is my favorite time to shoot. When you have clouds, when you have overcast, direct sunlight, it can be nice at certain times of day, but at the same time, it also creates shadows and different points of focus on the subject. So when you have a nice diffused light on an overcast day, it really evens things out, and you get to see more detail and more contrasts, essentially, in the right situations, such as this great blue heron. And then I chose this as a vertical one because when you look at the great blue heron, it is basically stretching out from the bottom to the top. There's not a lot going on left to right. The emphasis here was the great blue heron taking up that vertical space, and then on top of that, it's on top of a vertical dead tree. And so in this case, it just made sense to use vertical here. So one of the reasons I moved here back in 2008 was because of grizzly bears. So I always get excited when I see a grizzly bear. And this is the famous grizzly bear 610. This is the daughter of the famous grizzly bear 399, who was tragically killed in a wildlife collision in the fall of 2024. And in this case, she didn't have any cubs or anything with her. She was just walking across a meadow, getting from point A to point B. And like I love catching with grizzly bears, they always seem to have an expression on their face. Sometimes it's contemplative, sometimes it's just general happiness. You kind of see on this one. And then I always love, if I'm catching them walking or doing something, I always love trying to get them with their claws. Those claws are just massive and amazing. So any shot I can get with that is a good shot. Same thing, I was trying to get down low, so I was squatting down as much as I could, as safely as I could, which also allowed for that sagebrush and the willows in the distance to be blurred out behind her, which helps to pop her out from the background. This one was just such an amazing sunset. I was out camping with my daughter and a friend, and the sky just lit up, and it was stunning. We had all these yellow arrowleaf balsam root wildflowers in the foreground, and then the sky just started glowing in the background, and of course you had the dramatic Tetons there to make it all that much more incredible. So this was a place high up above Jackson Hole, so we had a great vantage point. Had a nice little clearing. I mean, even at 5 years old, my daughter had to appreciate just how beautiful it was. So this was definitely a beautiful scene. And of course, this is why people like shooting at sunrise and sunset, because that low sun is going to do some pretty amazing things to clouds if they're in the area. So this was as the sun was setting. You can see over there on the far left, there is some bright hot spots. And it wasn't too much, but had I gone any farther left, it probably would have been blown out there, and it probably would have had a much harder time balancing that contrast. So whenever you're shooting sunset and you want to shoot toward the sun, try to actually eliminate the sun from the frame, because the sun is so much brighter than everything else in the photo. It's going to create way too much contrast. So this was just a little bit off to the right from the sun, which actually worked out really well, because your eye's naturally going to go to the brightest spot in addition to whatever else is in focus. But a lot of times if there's a distinct bright point, it's going to go to that. And this allows your eye to kind of circle around the whole photo. It's going to follow those Tetons all the way over to the right side and then back down to where it catches those arrowleaf balsam root wildflowers and sort of circle around. And that is another great trait, if you can find in compositions, to just find those natural leading lines that are going to bring your eye around the frame. If you can get a circle, great. A lot of times just a diagonal from one corner to the opposite is also a great composition technique. And I don't remember if I have one of these in there right now, but we'll look and see. So this was actually the morning after that sunset. I was walking around and found this dusky grouse just foraging away in the vegetation. And unfortunately, it was not showing off any mating display. But you can see right above the eyebrow and just below, it was kind of, ready to display if it wanted to. It wasn't totally active, because otherwise that little orange spot above the eye would have been much larger and much more distinct. Same thing with that little air sac on the side. What I do like about this one is the lighting and the environment around it. I got down low, of course, and what you're seeing is that it's kind of tucked away in the vegetation, but it just had this one little beam of light getting through the forest trees to hit it. And that creates a really dynamic and beautiful look. And that, in addition to getting down, helps it pop out, because that beam of light was not hitting the background. It was only hitting that grouse for that little instant. And so that works out really well. The only thing I don't like is you'll notice that the grouse is off to the center. So you sort of have this whole little dead zone off to the top right, where there's not much going on. There's not really a lot to bring your eye over to, or to hold a lot of interest. That's just a little sticking point for me. Obviously, I still love this photo a lot, because it came out really well with the lighting and with the environment and things like that. So it's not a total loss. Plus you have that one little dead flower that's kind of reaching over in that direction. So not a total loss. Definitely still works in my opinion, but just a minor pet peeve sticking point that may or may not matter to some people.